This temperature sensor is also a humidity sensor, a light sensor, a smart button, a hub, and it's got one incredible feature that you won't see coming. This is the new SwitchBot Hub 2, and I must say, this has got to be one of my favourite devices from them already. They've truly outdone themselves. And let me explain why. But first, if you don't know what or who SwitchBot are, I would advise going to watch my original review of the SwitchBot lineup, which takes you through pretty much everything they have to offer. And if you're still here, well, that means you probably already know about SwitchBot. So, firstly, this no longer is a useless bit of plastic dangling behind my TV or shoved at the back of a cupboard. This can actually sit out on the side with pride, and I'll come back to why this is so important later in the episode. But it looks incredible. They've done a really good job of making it look modern but not obtrusive. It's got a welcoming, bright white display showing the temperature and humidity values of the room, which is read interestingly through an external module on the cable, which is meant to be outside of it so that there's less interference from the device and it gives you a more accurate reading, which is very interesting. But I was a little bit concerned about this display at first because, as you can imagine, if you're trying to sleep with it on, it might be a little bit something like this. Thankfully, there are two touch buttons at the bottom of this device, which will turn the display on or off so that you can actually get some sleep at night. Now, tapping the off leaves the kind of little buttons on the bottom with a very, very, very faint glow so that you can still tap them in the dark, which is a nice touch. But I can almost hear you asking on the other side of the screen, well, what's the point in having these two massive buttons at the bottom of the display just for turning it on and off? Well, here's where SwitchBot have done something rather interesting, because these two buttons don't just act as an on-off. You can use them to trigger automations as well. Now, within the app, you can disable the on-off functionality and choose to instead use these buttons to control the wider SwitchBot smart home. So, for example, I could set it to turn my SwitchBot lights on and off, or I could even set scenes within the SwitchBot app so that the buttons can do multiple things at once. This is a really nice touch, and it makes this hub so much more useful than its predecessor. These do have some limitations, which I'll take a look at very, very shortly, because before I do, I want to tell you what the Hub 2's secret power is. This thing can act as a smart controller for all of your infrared controlled devices. Now, okay, those of you that are fans of SwitchBot might be there saying, but hold on a minute, the Hub Mini had that as well. And you aren't wrong. But going back to my comment about this thing being on your side with pride, because of its positioning, it's far more suited to control infrared devices within your smart home. The old Hub Mini was just shoved at the back of a cupboard and hasn't seen the light of day since I installed mine. Simply all it is a square lump of plastic which serves no other function other than that of a bridge in my eyes. It just looks ugly if you keep it out. But with the 2, because it's relevant to have it out on the side so that you can read the humidity and the temperature values and use the buttons on the actual display, it consequently means that the infrared functionality is going to get used simply because it's in a much more practical position to deliver those infrared signals to devices. This includes things like TVs, aircon units, and even fans, which typically, even from Dyson, lack any form of smart home control. Sure, a smart plug would be a solution to some of these, but that's assuming that the device returns to a state it was on after a full power down, which isn't the case with my Dyson Tower fan. This, although on a smart plug, it does absolutely nothing. So I actually have to use this janky remote to control it after I've powered it on. But thankfully now I can shove this remote in the back of the drawer because I can actually program the Hub 2 to learn the remote signals. And when you do that, it even adds infrared devices into third-party applications like Alexa, essentially turning my non-smart devices smart. But this is Stu's reviews you're watching, so controlling just a fan evidently isn't enough. I want to put this infrared functionality under a real stress test by finding the most obscure and unusual thing to control by pairing it with this hub. Now you might be wondering why all of a sudden I'm in the dark, and that's because I've been setting up something rather special for my family and friends. So let me show you what happens when I press the on button on the Hub 2. Every single one of these LED candles is connected by infrared directly to the Hub 2, which is a first for Stu's Reviews, connecting candles to my smart home. If anyone wants to build a shrine of devotion to the King, Satan, or even Stu's Reviews, you can now make your shrine smart by adding the SwitchBot Hub 2 to the mix. Now, my wife has said that I can keep this in the living room if this video reaches 1,000 likes. So please hit that thumbs up, if nothing but to make sure that she gets to see this every single day of her life. Putting my serious cap on now, this really is a prime example of how incredible this device is. I mean, it manages to control 12 individual candles at the same time without any issue, which is great fun. And the infrared signal that it blasts is actually even stronger than the remote that the candles came with in the first place. Take a look at this. If I put the remote behind an object and press the button, they won't come on. Remove the object and they do. But watch what happens with the Hub 2 behind an object. I'm not even going to pretend to know how infrared works or why the Hub 2 works behind objects and the remote can't. All I can say is that it does. And you've got to admit that is pretty cool. If you feel like you can shed some light on why this is, feel free to drop a comment below. But what's super fun though, is that as I said earlier, anything paired up via infrared is automatically included in third-party services, meaning that I now have candles in Alexa and can control these with my voice. Turn off candles. Okay. Look at that! Come on, how fun is that? Turn on candles. So good! Honestly, I've been blown away with this functionality, and if this video doesn't reach 1,000 likes, I have to destroy this lovely shrine of devotion, then actually repurposing these candles so that I can have smart candles dotted around the living room is perhaps one of the finest ideas that I've ever had for my smart home yet, if I do say so myself, and it's all thanks to the Hub 2. It's a hell of a lot of fun for sure, but there's another reason why the Hub 2 is really important. And that's because it brings Matter support to SwitchBot products. Now, at the time of this episode, it varies on device support, but eventually the Hub 2 will make all of the SwitchBot products Matter compatible, meaning that we'll be able to bring the entire system into HomeKit, which is fantastic news. Hopefully, we might even end up seeing my candles in HomeKit at some point too, but for now, SwitchBot are concentrating on getting their physical products into HomeKit through the use of this hub. It truly is a brilliant addition to the SwitchBot lineup, but I've found a few things are slightly perplexing. The first is the external Swiss-made climate sensor that essentially is built into the cable. Now, on one hand, yes, having external will reduce interference, therefore giving you a much more accurate result, which is obviously a good thing, but it comes with one large consideration, and that's that you can no longer power it with your own cable. Now, for most, it probably won't be an issue, but for those of us who are at least trying to be a bit better with cable management, it's going to cause problems. Imagine that your plug is very close to where you want to place the hub, perhaps on the same surface even. Well, you end up with this massive... No, hold on. No, you end up being left with this massive sort of dangly bit. It's quite a long cable to actually try and hide and put somewhere, especially if you've got nowhere to put it. And at 2 meters, it's not exactly a small thing to try and hide. But then on the other side of the spectrum, imagine that the plug is a long way from where you'll place it. You aren't actually able to use a longer cable. You could potentially use some extender here, but still, the inability to change this cable is an important factor when considering where you're going to place this thing. There's one other thing that I wish this had, and that's the ability to assign routines and automations to the bottom buttons outside of the SwitchBot ecosystem. Unfortunately, you can only use the buttons for devices and scenes within SwitchBot. It's not such a massive problem because that's just software based, and they could eventually open these up to do just that. And also, if you have SwitchBot Smart Home, then these guys make nearly every form of smart home gadget available, and most are amazing quality at reasonable price. And because of this, you can likely buy a bunch of things to create whatever routine you wanted internally in the system if you absolutely needed the buttons on this to trigger routines or scenes. But it still would have been nice to be able to have them as virtual buttons to have extensions outside of the SwitchBot app. Hopefully we'll see that in future. As for the price, it's a bit more expensive than SwitchBot have charged for hubs in the past. At £80, it's 45 quid more expensive than the Hub Mini, but consider that this also has a climate sensor inside it, and one of those would set you back about 22 quid, and that's the cost of the Hub Mini, and it comes to a total of £57. So, for an extra 23 quid, you can get smart buttons for controlling routines, visible and much stronger infrared control, a light meter, and lastly HomeKit, a Matter support to bring the entire line of SwitchBot into HomeKit. So is it worth the extra 23 quid? Absolutely. And in fact, this is probably one of my favourite devices from SwitchBot so far. It's just designed really well and overall has some great functionality. And if this is a sign of things to come with the next generation of SwitchBot gear, then I cannot wait to see what's next. And if you do want to check out the SwitchBot Hub 2, I'll drop a link below for you, and I will also drop a link to the candles that I'm using if you want to create your own smart shrine devoted to Stu's reviews using the SwitchBot Hub 2 and candles. And remember, hit that thumbs up to make sure that this shrine stays a permanent feature just for my wife. I'll see you back for another episode of Stu's Reviews soon.